naturally you would say you want to improve the quality of life of people, and in this case, Black people. Well, then there has to be measurable change, right? And what can you really do in 5 years becomes an important question when we're trying to essentially counterbalance decades of a reality that continues to be perpetuated and reinforced by systemic policies, practices, both federally and locally, right? So what can you really do?
Welcome to Six Pillars in Action, a podcast that takes you inside the work, the people, and the purpose behind one of the most meaningful investments in African American communities right here in Indianapolis. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, partners, and change makers connected to the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative to talk about what's happening, why it matters, and how real transformation is taking shape across our city. Whether you're a community member, an organization doing the work, or someone who simply wants to understand how change happens, this conversation is for you.
Welcome to another episode of the Six Pillars in Action podcast. I am your host, Samantha Douglas, and here on this podcast, we're taking an in-depth look at the incredible work of the IAAQLI, or the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative. Woo, look, it only took a whole season for me to get it down pat. We are here today with Dr. Carlin Tenchner. So I always forget your technical title with the IAAQLI. So tell us about that and what you do with the process.
Yeah, so technically, I'm the director of operations. All of us are consultants from our independent businesses, but we came together to fulfill specific roles so that we can implement this initiative. And what my role entails is a lot of strategic visioning and operationalizing what we do in terms of like setup and design and implementation. So for layman's terms, like for example, on a day-to-day, I might be responsible for coordinating our implementation around the strategies. I might be responsible for helping to design those strategies and then articulating the request for proposals. In terms of our programming, I might be responsible first thinking about those programming, but then also thinking about how we implement. So for example, I believe Willis Bright was talking about previously the technical assistance that we offered organizations. So we thought about that first, thought about the operationalizing of it, the value of it, how do we coordinate our consultants, and then ultimately how do we implement and provide the space, and then what we want to accomplish as a result of it. So that just gives you a couple of examples of my role within the work.
I hear a lot of like, you're a how guy.
Yeah.
Like we want to do these things, but this is how.
Yeah, I think I would say that I'm an implementer by experience, and I think by gifting in some ways. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, cool. So today, talking about just like real world impact of the IAAQLI funding. So from your perspective, when this funding actually hit the community, like what did that real world impact look like?
Yeah, I think it was maybe threefold. I think the first was organizations that have been historically funded and organizations that may not have been able to participate in the funding space as a recipient of larger grant dollars have the opportunity to grow, scale, and impact further, which I think is the immediate intent of grant dollars hitting the space or the community. Organizations who've been doing good work or wish to do good work get access to resources. Number two, they were able to improve their infrastructure to do it more effectively, which ultimately got to number three, which is the most critical part, which is the resident. Our goal has always been to improve the quality of life of residents, but we knew we had to first improve infrastructure and capacity for organizations that serve those residents so that they can have a sustainable impact beyond our initiative. And so our goal was always the resident, but we know that the direct process to getting to resident is organizations.
I love that. I love that. Like we overlook that so much, and we think it's just doing this one thing and staying there, but also not being fluid enough to getting into that space and seeing like maybe some of the things that you thought that you would need to do or need to wasn't the case, and then other things did pop up. Was that the case for you all? Like, did you guys learn, and were you able to transition through that?
Yeah, I think every time we were thinking about a new round of funding, we had to evolve based on what we learned from previous rounds. I think conceptually we knew we live in an ecosystem. The ecosystem is not made of one individualized part, right? It has layers, and those layers need to be attended to. So we knew that early on, but we needed to operationalize that. And as we continued to learn by round, we started started to think about, how do we approach it a little bit differently based on the previous lessons learned. For example, did the resident actually receive the impact that we hoped would happen? And so each round we had the opportunity to reflect on that. Did the organizations grow and expand their ability to do what they said they would do? And did they have the necessary resources to do so? And those resources are not always economic. And sometimes we think they're economic, right? And that's all resource means. Resource also means technical assistance, consultation, training, and preparation, because organizations need infrastructure. So some of the things we started learning later on was we need to provide consultancy to these organizations pre and post, right? And so, for example, you get a round 1 or round 2 grantee who is moving towards implementation of what they articulate in their proposal, but they may be delayed in implementation. So we started to convene some of our consultants to go learn, understand, and support. And that's some of the evolution that we did over time.
I love that, because you guys, like, literally what you just said before that is helping other organizations do that. But while you guys were doing that, you were also doing that for yourselves and the organization you guys have just built in real time.
Absolutely. We are a small foundation that was built within a year, and it felt very rushed, which meant we then had to make it methodical. And so that meant that also we had to be patient with ourselves, because we experienced our own evolution as we were also producing opportunities for organizations to evolve.
Right, right. So in earlier episodes, we've talked, I feel like, extensively about the 6 pillars and how they came about. But can you share some examples of how pillar aligned funding is translating into like actual measurable outcomes?
Yeah, and it's not a simple answer, because naturally you would say you want to improve the quality of life of people, and in this case, Black people. Well, then there has to be measurable change, right? And what can you really do in 5 years becomes an important question when we're trying to essentially counterbalance decades of a reality that continues to be perpetuated and reinforced by systemic policies, practices, both federally and locally, right? So what can you really do? And when we first started, we were like, well, the KPIs need to be the ability to demonstrate measurable change in people's actual quality of life as articulated or identified by indicators of wealth or the social determinants of health. But we had to back up a little bit and say, like, can we really do that? And is that fair to even hold ourselves accountable, as we are only one entity that's trying to do work on behalf of this population, and organizations have been in existence prior to us, and that work still continues. And so part of the success that we started to look at more about is whether or not organizations grew in their capacity to serve, whether or not they were able to complete successfully their proposed projects, and the extent to which those proposed projects were able to create measurable change as articulated in the grant applications. That was, to a larger degree, the best we can truly do in terms of being able to prove and demonstrate outcomes. What we will be able to do is now compare, before we started, what was the data, and after we concluded, what was the data, and did we move the needle across some of those social determinants of health. But we also know that we were not solely responsible for that, and there was a lot of elements happening at the same time. But what we were able to do, hopefully, is say, as a result of the work we were doing, this was successful, and if we continue to receive funding, this is what we can continue to do.
Right. So in essence, you all were able to see like what the organization did, like people facing, what they were able to do internally, and how you guys were able to support both of those things. And then now you'll be looking at like the overall picture of how it's like come about in the community, like what people have actually felt or seen. Are you guys doing like narratives, like stories?
I think within the Black community, historically, narrative has always been a part of our ability to talk about transformation. So absolutely, we got to hear the story. And that's how we started. We first heard the story of individuals that are in grassroots organizations, residents, and then also we called them grass tops, but folks who lead organizations. And they were telling us stories. And so, of course, we got to come back to that story and see to what extent that story has changed.
Right. So how have organizations been able to align with the 6 pillars without losing their own identity and mission?
Yeah, what we know is organizations sometimes have mission creep, right? And because of what we perceive to be scarce resources.
Oh, that's the first time I've heard mission creep. I usually hear mission drift.
Yeah, I call it mission creep. I mean, it's the same idea, but organizations start to feel like wherever the funding goes, therefore we need to go. And what we tried to do was create really clear strategies, but also strategies that were nimble enough to be aligned to other core missions of organizations and nonprofits. And so generally speaking, nonprofits could see themselves in our intent. Yeah. And so our goal was to allow them to stay true to who they were while also aligning to our intent. But then they could articulate the extent to which they feel that they align, right? And so being broad enough but intentional enough in the wording gives space for both to be true. Organizations can align but also maintain their core mission without transforming to adapt what we want them to do solely without losing their identity.
So what role has collaboration played among funded organizations?
So we knew that collaboration was important because I used that word earlier, ecosystem. And we knew that a lot of organizations, not always by intention, struggle to get outside of silos because they're so entrenched in the work, right? And then for good reason, they don't always have the capacity to stretch outside themselves because the work is daily and necessary to have focus on it. And because they may not have the capacity, they don't have room to collaborate across aisles. And sometimes when we think about organizations and the lack of collaboration, we think of it negatively, like they don't want to. We don't got no trust in the community. It's not always that. Sometimes it's just capacity to collaborate. And so we wanted to reinforce that, not only just with nonprofits, collaborating with nonprofits, small and large, but also for-profits having the opportunity to serve nonprofits in supporting their infrastructure and capacity. So we've seen organizations do that really well, from folks being fiduciary agents for smaller organizations to folks collaborating on projects where one organization fills a gap and the other has expertise in another gap, and they feel like by working together, they can make a broader impact. And we've seen that increase round to round, and I think round 4, we saw a sizable amount of organizations apply in collaborative effort to impact in a broader way.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that you mentioned that sometimes they just don't have the capacity to collaborate. I think people overlook that it also takes work to work with someone else.
Oh, my goodness. Early learning centers, for example, let's use them. That was one of our strategies to look at early learning for young people. And these are community-based organizations that are often home-based or community-based within a facility. But that director, who is also the CEO and the executive office, doesn't have time because they're day-to-day with the kids and the families. And so it's not that they don't desire it. There has to be a mechanism to access those relationships, and they don't always have the ability to cultivate it. And so organizations have to do that on their behalf.
Yeah, and sometimes, truthfully, like, sometimes we hate to say it, but sometimes for smaller things too that we need, sometimes it's easier to do something ourselves and quicker than it is to like build that relationship, build trust, and then be able to really hand that off in a way that collaboration will benefit both organizations.
It's true.
And
it's true. And that's why we need foundations, funders, the like, to really understand how the community and the individuals who are leading these organizations operate in a day-to-day, and then how can we fill gaps in what they might need access to without adding another stressor. And so that's why one of our initiatives was really focused on how do we support the expansion of early learning entities without creating an additional burden. And if we ask them to do more, how do we incentivize their engagement so that whatever they're receiving is not just resources, but also things that are tangible that help them in their day-to-day operation.
You know, there was something, this brought to mind, there was something that I was talking to actually last year, one of our major foundations about, and I was telling them they'll see a community leader who's kind of like battered and bruised, and they're trying to build this sandcastle, and they'll come up and they'll say, hey, let me help you build that sandcastle, but not tend to the person who's battered and bruised trying to, because if you helped me, I could build my sandcastle, you know? And so like when it comes to that kind of perspective, like, you guys were able to support the people who are doing this work as well. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, trying to, right? Like, and now you're speaking the language of a mental health provider, which I am, and that got me excited. We know that this work is incredibly hard, and people want to burn out, and if they haven't burned out, they're burned out in the position, and that is actually like tremendously sad when there is no mechanism to attend to the person who's doing that incredible work. I think it happens increasingly so in those small smaller grassroots organizations because they're an N of one trying to lead a lot. But it's also true in larger organizations. It's just not easier to see because it looks like people are well. And so I can't say that was an intentional focus necessarily, but it was more of an indirect benefit of some of what we were trying to do, which is let's offer funding, but also let's offer programming. Yeah. And when we offer funding, let's allow for that funding to articulate a holistic response to both the organization and the people they're serving.
Yeah. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, but I would love to know, like, how does this investment strengthen long-term institutional capacity and not just short-term progress? So, like, how do you guys see this, like, going on?
Yeah, the hope is that funders continue to fund this to the extent that's possible. Like that's the prayer and the hope. And we don't have control over it, but we do have influence. And part of the way that we were influencing that and continue to do so is advocating for the value of what was accomplished in these 5 years. And some of the way that we can do that is by demonstrating how organizations and their capacity has grown to continue to access funding. And so the technical assistance, for example, how do we prepare organizations to be able to compete for the dollars that are available beyond us? That is really key. How do we teach grassroots organizations to connect to fiduciary organizations, and how do we help them steward that relationship and demonstrate impact and be able to articulate that impact by how they do interim reports and support themselves and be able to prove that what they said they would do was successful? That's part of the entire working mechanism of receiving grant dollars. You first propose and articulate with measurability, and then you implement and demonstrate what you were able to implement by articulating it through written reports. Yes. And that's the coin of the realm. There's no other way to do this, even with trust-based philanthropy. And so we wanted to help organizations understand that approach, but also give them the tools to learn.
I love to steward the relationship. Again, that's one of them things that's been overlooked. Like, so many times I've heard organizations apply for things, not get it, and I'll ask them, like, well, did you have a relationship with the folks? Did you reach out to anybody? Did you talk to anybody? And I don't think we talk about that enough. That, like, those relationships, they need stewardship.
They do. And you have to see that program officers are humans, and they have capacity themselves, and their capacity is connected to what they know and who they've been able to see demonstrate outcomes, right? Yeah. And no one wants to propose a group of individual organizations to be funded who they can't say will produce the outcome.
Right.
And that's important. And that relationship is a trust-based relationship, right? And so think, like, our first round we put out like 25 million. 60 million was requested. So what sets you apart from another organization? It's not just how great your application was. In addition to, it's what people know about you and what you know about the people who might be evaluating. And you don't always get to know who the evaluators are. But what you can do is ensure that you have a great reputation and that you have a relationship and that you steward those relationships with the people who make decisions. Yes. That increases the probability. It doesn't guarantee it, but it does certainly increase it.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
When we come back, we will hear again from Tony Mason about the legacy of the IAAQLI.
Coming up next on the 6 Pillars in Action podcast, we'll continue our conversation with IAAQLI leaders. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and visit the IAAQLI website to learn more about the incredible work being done and how you can get involved.
Welcome back to 6 Pillars in Action. We are here with Tony Mason again, and this time we are going to talk about the legacy of the IAAQLI in this funding process. So now that, funding has been given out, implementation has been underway, how have you all thought about sustainability beyond this?
Well, an important part of what we will do this year is obviously continue to tell the stories of impact and success in the community, uplifting not only the work and the organizations, but also showcasing the people who have benefited, because that's going to be a very important part of us telling the story. We know that we also now have to undertake what will be a comprehensive evaluation process of the initiative, looking at everything from the impact and the success of the grants and the grantees, but also evaluating our processes and how we went about doing this work. And that becomes important because, who knows what the future holds? Could another opportunity like this one present itself again here in Indianapolis? Quite possibly. You just never know. We didn't know this would happen.
Right.
But there's also something to be said for other Urban League affiliates across the country and in other cities where there are major philanthropies that may be watching the work that's being done here and could be saying, is that the way to go? Is that the way to leverage perhaps the local urban league affiliate, the National Urban League, and to get people around the table to work on collective impact and to get the work done? And so we know that there's a lot at stake as far as with the work that is still being done, some of the new projects that may have been launched with fourth round funding, but we view this from a legacy standpoint as just the beginning.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more that can come out of this work, and particularly if we can play a role in influencing other philanthropies in the community to come alongside the best of the best, if you will, the grantees that are doing this work to say, here is where more dollars are needed to make investments. We know that we've been making inroads with affordable housing, in education, providing resources to help entrepreneurs and small businesses, also helping people to gain access to career pathways and training opportunities that hopefully will lead to better jobs with benefits and all of those great things. And so we know it's the start. It's not the end.
So what accountability measures are in place to ensure impact doesn't fade over time?
Well, I think the biggest challenge and what we hope from this process in terms of how we've come alongside grantees and organizations to support their work is really the leveraging or improving of standards of practice and operations so that they've got the evaluation tools in place to show the impact that they're having, and that as they start to build upon their work and when they think strategically about what comes next for the organizations across the community, that an important part of that will be building upon the work that came out of the IAAQLI, and perhaps it's a springboard for much larger collaborations and a broader base of support from the community. Because an important thing that has come out of this is the fact that we know that not just the Lilly Endowment, but other funders and key institutions in the community are now more aware of organizations, grassroots, grass tops, all across the community that are actually doing great work. And we know that if we can help them to generate more funding and support, then maybe they will be able to even scale some of these critical initiatives that are taking place.
And I know that we talked about storytelling and narrative a little bit with Carlin, but also like how will data and storytelling continue to shape the future of investment?
Well, I will tell you this, you have to have both.
Yeah.
I say that not just in this role with the IAAQLI, but as president and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League. It is essentially a standard requirement when you are working with funders. They want to hear those success stories. They want to see people. They want to hear from the people that have been impacted by the work that you've done. But of course, they want the narrative. They want the quantitative data, because that becomes a part of how perhaps they go back and justify to their funding sources why they should continue to make investments in the community and or into specific organizations that are doing the work.
Yeah. I think it's so important to like keep those things together, because it just feels like the picture is incomplete without both, right? Because if you have the individual stories, but you can't prove that this can be replicated, what good is that? And then you have the data, but you don't have like the people. How's this impacting people? Yeah, I always think it's so interesting that we focus so much. I feel like as organizations, we tell stories so much, and we have to do a better job at the data piece, being able to connect that this isn't just one story, but this is a story that can be replicated, and we can prove it through numbers.
Yes, we have to come to accept and embrace that data is our friend.
Yes.
And if we can capture that and effectively use it to tell our stories, and we'll have a greater chance at success and receiving additional funds. I think it's also important just to share with the community that for those who've been positively impacted by the initiative, by a grant that was awarded to an organization in your neighborhood or community, you have to be an important part and a voice in this. Just as you gave life and voice to the priorities and strategies that help shape this initiative, you also now have to lean back in and talk about how you were positively impacted by the work. That is absolutely going to be crucial to influencing what comes next.
Yeah, and I know we've been able to track some of those stories through the podcast.
Yes.
I've been able to talk to so many different organizations that have been like incredibly impacted by this work and this opportunity, that always come to the podcast with just like gratefulness, but
Yes.
also it's almost gratefulness that's like secondhand, because they're grateful that they get to serve more people or do more things with the people that they're serving.
Yes.
And I love to see that, because it always just speaks to the heart of the people that you all are being able to fund. And I think that's incredible, because I can imagine as a funder, the goal is not just to make sure you're giving out money, but to make sure that it's going to the right places.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how are you building systems that outlast individual grants or leadership transitions?
And so, it's been through the work that we have been doing through our sixth pillar, the organizational capacity building, leadership development, where we've been investing through grants in organizations to further solidify their base or their foundation, their operations, if you will, and also along the way to provide hopefully what would be opportunities for key staff members that may be involved with program and service delivery, for them to strengthen their skills and their knowledge base, as well as that of the executive director or the organizational leader, that's an important part of this, and also in helping them from a system standpoint to develop relationships with key community partners that perhaps they've not worked with in the past, developing relationships with funders, so that ultimately these become a part of their relationships. It's not IAAQLI's relationship. It's not the Indianapolis Urban League's relationship. It's between that organization and that funding source, if you will. The collaborative part, collaborations become incredibly important here, because, again, our challenges and problems are so vast that not any one organization or entity can solve the problems, even in just their own neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's going to take all of us leaning in, and those partnerships are going to be key to scaling up programs, and particularly in a moment in time such as now, when funding is challenged and threatened, with respect to DEI or anything that is race-based.
Yeah. My goodness, I was still telling somebody before that, like, man, going into this, I felt like, listen, we made through 4 years before, we can do it again, but 1 year in, it's thick.
Yes,
it's thick, it's tough, and I hope it's getting better. But I'm definitely grateful for opportunities like this. Mm-hmm. So what does success look like 5 or 10 years from now for the 6 pillars and for Indianapolis?
I would say 5 to 10 years from now, success to me and probably to the majority of our team would look essentially like a landscape where our organizations are thriving. They're playing a key role in the development of affordable housing for their neighborhoods. They're leaning in and ensuring that the schools also have resources and partnerships that help us to really be that village and put our arms around our young people and to get them prepared for life, whether it's going into workforce, going to college, going into the military. From a health standpoint, that the health outcomes start to improve, for our people in this community. We know that we are behind in everything.
Yes.
And so that has to change, because if you don't have your health, you have nothing.
You know, out here on the Far East Side, they've told us a lot about how our life expectancy is like drastically different than folks just 7 miles away.
Yes.
And that, like, I don't think people realize that when we talk about like things like environmental justice, when we talk about all the different areas that the 6 pillars hit, that no, that's literally like a threat to your life, your health, your well-being.
Yes.
Like, I don't think we always make those connections well.
No, we don't. And again, that's symptomatic of just the vastness of all the challenges that we face, that sometimes it becomes daunting just to simply connect the dots. You know, another thing I would say, within 5 to 10 years, if we look at the strength and growth within the entrepreneurship and business sector, you know, businesses that are growing, thriving, that are hiring and employing our people, that our dollar is recirculating in our community, just as it does in other communities, and I'll leave it at that. We want to make sure that these things are happening, but we know that, again, this is just the beginning. And so where we go from here, you know, will not only depend on what funders do, but ultimately what we do and how we continue to build upon the relationships that, in many cases, that have been nurtured and have grown through this process, because we know that we can make a difference in the lives of the people in our neighborhoods and in our communities. We have the ability to do that. We can be the cavalry and all of that. We don't have to depend on other people if we just simply work together and uplift and support each other.
Yeah. For the last question, I'm gonna circle back around to something you started to touch on in the beginning. So if other cities are watching this work, what lessons should they take from this approach in you all's work?
Lessons that they should take from our approach and our work. First things first, I would encourage them to reach out to us. We are more than willing to share the nuts and bolts of our experience from day one, coming forward for 5 years.
Yes.
Because we've learned a lot along the way. We've had a lot of great impact and success, but we've also learned some lessons too. And we would be more than willing to share those with anyone who has an interest. That likely will also be a part of some of the work that we'll do in this year and through next year is making sure that we share the stories, not only in this community, but perhaps in even some of the other communities in our state. As you know, we have an Urban League affiliate in Northwest Indiana that also benefited from this initiative through a separate grant, as well as the Fort Wayne Urban League. They're both doing great work and they're growing as affiliates. And so we want to make sure that they benefit from our learnings as well. And as you know, the National Urban League has been an incredible partner in receiving this grant and supporting our work. And we know that, again, they continue to watch this work and they've even said out loud, we know that we have proof of concept. And so that this work can be replicated in other communities. If we can get the dollars, we can make it happen.
Yeah. Even a Southern Urban League, you need an Evansville Urban League.
You know, there have been conversations about that.
I'm telling you.
Just as you know, we used to have an Urban League in South Bend, Anderson, and I'm sure there have been some in other communities.
Yeah.
And so we need to get back to, you know, strengthening our organization, strengthening the Indiana Black Expo chapters that are statewide and other key entities that serve our people.
Yeah.
So we all have to play a part in that. While we know the IAAQLI is focused on Indianapolis and Marion County, we do understand and know that a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here again today. Thank you all for watching. Make sure that you engage, stay informed through this process to learn more about this historic investment and how you can stay connected to the process and learn what this future looks like with the organization. You can find more of our videos on the channel and on social media. It's always at IAAQLI. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the 6 Pillars in Action podcast. The stories and insights you hear on this podcast are just one part of a much bigger movement focused on improving the quality of life for African Americans throughout Indianapolis. To learn more about the work, the impact, and the organizations helping to drive change, be sure to visit the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative website, follow IAAQLI on social media, and sign up for the newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news and opportunities. Transformation is happening, and staying connected is one of the best ways to be part of it.